All right, so we're going to start with, well, I'll just have this ancient map of Paris out there. I think it's kind of interesting. It was not quite a massive city as what we're used to, is it? It was definitely, if you look at this one here, ancient Paris, very, very tiny. And then it built, built to the surrounds over here, the 1572 one, which is more akin to what we have now. All right, so we're at AD 1185 to 1187. During these transactions in France, the King of England had strictly observed the late treaty and forbore to interfere in the domestic disputes of a rival, whose tranquillity he might have disturbed, and whose authority he might have shaken. The turbulence of his children was a continual source of trouble and affliction to the aged monarch. Prince Henry had renewed his pretensions to the Duchy of Normandy, but on receiving an augmentation of his income, withdrew his claims and submitted to his father. After this accommodation, Geoffrey, by the king's desire, did homage to his elder brother for the Duchy of Brittany. Richard was requested to do the same for Aquitaine, where he rejected the proposal with such evident marks of disdain and resentment as occasioned an immediate and most violent animosity between him and young Henry. Equally impetuous, they had recourse to arms to decide their dispute, and the contest was pursued with such malevolent fury that no quarter was shown on either side. Their father at length, with great difficulty, composed this distance, and prevailed on the contending parties to sign a treaty of peace near Limoges. But he soon found that his eldest son was engaged in a conspiracy and preparing to take arms against himself. While young Henry was planning these criminal projects, he was seized with a fever at Martel, a castle in the vicinity of Touraine. And when his physicians informed him that they entertained not the smallest hope of his recovery, he was stricken with that deep, deep remorse for his ungrateful conduct to the best of his fathers, which repeated acts of generosity and indulgence had never proved sufficient to excite. Which repeated acts of generosity and indulgence had never proved sufficient to excite. He immediately sent a message to the King of England expressive of his repentance and earnestly entreating a visit. Henry, greatly affected with his son's situation, was about to comply with his request, but his friends, representing the danger of trusting his person to those, well, we'll go with sagacious conspirator. No, they're not sagacious. Flagacious. We'll go with flagacious. Yeah, sagacious. They were really super smart. Flagacious conspirators, very wise. No, they were flagacious. Who attended on the sick prince. He took from his finger, his ring finger, a ring of his forgiveness. The prince received it with great emotion, and pressing it to his lips soon after expired. Okay, so he took the ring and then died. So was there something on the ring that poisoned him? Or I don't know. Yeah, because this ring was sent to him by the archbishop as a token of his forgiveness. He received it with great emotion, and pressing it to his lips soon after expired. We don't know if the ring was tainted or he was just going to die anyway. Let's hope it was just he was going to die anyway. His widow, the daughter of the late King of France, by his second wife Constance, having no children by him, Philip now claimed Gifford and some other dependencies in Normandy, which had been allotted as the dowry of Marguerite. But Henry, unwilling to part with them, offered to conclude the marriage between Richard, now become heir to the throne, and Alice, the sister of Philip, provided he was suffered to retain the disputed territory. The proposal was acquiesced in, and the two monarchs parted with the mutual professions of esteem and friendship. This interval of tranquility was employed by Philip in the internal regulation of his dominions, and in repressing the formidable enterprises of the Duke of Burgundy. But the calm produced by the late peace was of short duration, and the subjects of Philip and Henry were again exposed to the horrors of war. The marriage of Alice and Richard was still studiously delayed. Geoffrey, the second son of Henry and Duke of Brittany, had revolted from his father and acknowledged himself the vassal of France. But his undutiful designs were interpreted by death, and he expired of a fall from his horse at a tournament. Philip, however, retained from Henry his widow Constance, his infant daughter Eleanor, and a posthumous son named Arthur, and asserted his claim to protect and watch over the offspring of his vassal. Richard had also refused to yield homage to the King of France for the counties of Guyenne and Poitou. So it's another horse death. And I imagine they happened a lot back then, because that was their transport. And they're quite dangerous, in a hurry or whatever. So next we have Philip, enraged at this proof of disobedience in the prince, and displeased with Henry for delaying and the promised union, declared war against father and son, and entering Berry, took Issoudun, Cresac, and several other strong places, after which laid siege to Châteauroux on the banks of Indre. The spirits of the garrison were animated by the presence of Richard and John, the sons of the English monarch, and Henry himself, alarmed for the safety of the princes, hastily collected his forces and advanced to their relief. The hostile armies awaited in anxious suspense the signal of battle, But the conflict was averted by the legates of Pope Urbain III, who threatened with the penalty of excommunication whoever should begin the engagement. This menace had the desired effect. The monarchs laid down their arms, and a truce for 2 years was concluded between them. That's wonderful. So this is almost like the first time in history that a pope actually got them to stop and, say, hey, penalty of excommunication to both of you, whoever should begin it. And it worked. All right, the joy. Well, there might have been a few others, but this one is really pronounced in the book. Okay, the joy which the kingdom experienced at this unexpected accommodation was considerably heightened by the birth of a prince on the 5th of September, 1187. The hopes of seeing the blood of Charlemagne once more established on the throne of France inspired the people with the most enthusiastic pleasure. The Bishop of Tournai performed the ceremony of baptism and gave to the royal infant the name of Louis, while Philip found in the birth of an heir a new cause for esteeming a princess who had the best title to his affections. But the rejoicings occasioned by this happy event were suddenly interrupted by the reception of some dismal intelligence from the Christians in Palestine. After the departure of Louis VII from the Holy Land, the Crusaders experienced a succession of calamities that reduced them to the last extremity. But the frequent repetition of disasters, which had nearly depopulated the Western world and exhausted its treasures, were yet insufficient to check the folly of these spiritual knights errant, and a new occurrence, rekindling the torch of fanaticism. Oh my gosh. Okay, they're all getting fanatic. Inspired the adventurers, both ecclesiastical and military, among the Latin Christians with additional fury. I know I'm trying to be quite takitato so the words are understood by the script maker, the transcript maker. Saladin, a prince equally distinguished for personal courage and greatness of soul, having on the death of the Caliph Alad established herself on the throne of Egypt, began to extend his conquests over the east. After the reduction of Syria, Arabia, Persia, and Mesopotamia, finding the settlement of the Christians in Palestine an invincible impediment to the progress of his arms, he exerted all his valor and political skill to subdue that territory, which, though barren and of little extent, was to him of the utmost importance. Profiting by the defection which prevailed among the champions of the cross, and having corrupted the fidelity of the Count of Tripoli, who commanded their armies, he invaded the frontiers with an army of 50,000 men. a desperate action ensued at Tibar Ried, which was disputed with great obstinacy for 2 whole days, when Saladin obtained a complete victory that totally annihilated the force of the kingdom of Jerusalem, whose monarch, Guy de Lusignan, was taken prisoner. After this celebrated battle, in which the Christians had to lament the loss of the real cross on which our Saviour was crucified, that fell into the hands of the infidels, the city of Jerusalem surrendered to the victorious Saladin. The kingdom of Antioch was almost entirely reduced, and except a few maritime towns, but little remained of those boasted acquisitions which, near a century before, it had required the efforts of all Europe to obtain. All right, very good one for the religious followers here. We're talking about the cross, and the real cross, the actual real cross on which our Saviour was crucified, mentioned right here in the book, that fell into the hands of the infidels. So that's what happened. They actually had the cross up to this point in time complete. And the infidels got a hold of it, so we don't know if they burned it or what. But anyway, this dreadful reverse of fortune threw all the Western Christians into the utmost consternation and alarm. Pope Urbain III was so much affected with the news that he is said to have died of grief, and his successor, Gregory VIII, employed the whole time of his short pontificate in urging all the Christians who acknowledged his authority to take up arms and hasten to repair the disgrace they had sustained. The general cry was that those were unworthy of enjoying any inheritance in heaven who did not rescue from the domination of the infidels the inheritance of God upon earth, and deliver from servitude that country which the presence of their Redeemer had rendered sacred. It's a big deal. You still the cross. It's been there for 1,100 years, almost 1,200 years. Okay, 1188. William, Archbishop of Tyre, ambassador from the Christians in the Holy Land, having procured a conference between Philip and Henry near Guilford on the 21st of January, enforced these various topics, gave a pathetic description of the state of the Eastern Christians, and employed every argument that could rouse the ruling passions of the age, superstitious zeal, and the spirit of chivalry. The 2 kings immediately took the cross from the hands of the archbishop, and the counts of Flanders and Champagne, with many other powerful noblemen, followed the example, and as the emperor, Frederick I joined the confederacy. Some well-grounded with hopes of success were entertained, and men flattered themselves with an enterprise which had failed through the discord of independent leaders, or the temerity of imprudent princes, might at last, by the joint efforts of monarchs so potent be brought to a happy termination. So it's like the cross, they're passing this cross around, I can't believe it. So now they think they've got the cross back somehow. It didn't have termites apparently. Now we have Philip, without loss of time, convened an assembly at Paris at which several ordinances were enacted, as well for the purpose of providing for the expenses of war, as for preventing those disorders which had occasioned the failure of the last crusade. It was decreed that all those who should not assume the cross, whether ecclesiastics or laics, should contribute the 10th part of their revenue and movable effects towards the relief of the Christians in Palestine. So in a way this is saying a tithing, give a 10th part of what you make and give it. Very similar to the Mormons, that they are into the tithing of it, and it's about 10%. So maybe they got it from there all those years ago. The only exceptions were in favor of the Cistercian and Carthusian monks, and the monks of Fauterode, and the hospital of the reception of lepers. So if you were a leper, you didn't have to pay. This tax was called Saladine's tithe. Tithing, yes, tithe. From its being exacted for the reception, from its being exacted for equipping an armament against that sultan. Some regulations also with regard to discipline were here adopted. The soldiers were forbidden to blaspheme or to play at dice, the knights to wear gaudy habiliments, men of opulence to have more than 2 bought dishes on their table at a meal, and women to follow the army, except a few washerwomen. Advanced in years and pure in reputation, no interest was to be paid during this expedition, for money borrowed, and all the crusaders, even the ecclesiastics, were authorized to receive these 3 years of their revenue in advance. So the ecclesiastics were authorized, they got 3 years of their revenue straight up. And then so here we have then that every person might be enabled to support the expense of the voyage. So they got all the tithing, they paid for the trip. Okay, so 1189. Everything was ready for, it's amazing they could do all of this, isn't it? Everything was ready for the expedition to Palestine when the flames of war again burst forth in Europe and induced the rival monarchs of France. France and England to turn those arms against each other which had been destined to oppose their mutual enemy. Philip, jealous of Henry's power, entered into a private conference with young Richard, and working on his ambitions and impatient temper, persuaded him, instead of supporting and aggrandizing that the monarchy, which he was one day to inherit, to seek present power and independence by disturbing and dismembering it. In order to afford a pretext for hostilities between the two kings, Richard invaded the territories of Raymond, Count of Toulouse, who immediately complained of this violence to the King of France as his superior lord. Philip remonstrated with Henry, but received for answer that Richard had confessed to the Archbishop of Dublin that his enterprise against Raymond had been undertaken by the approbation of Philip himself, and was conducted by his authority. Philip, who might have been covered with shame and confusion by this detection of his perfidy, still prosecuted his design and invaded the provinces of Berry and Auvergne under colour of revenging the quarrel of the Count of Toulouse. Henry retaliated by making inroads upon the frontiers of France and burning Dreux. As this war, which destroyed all hopes of success in the projected crusade, gave great scandal, the two kings held a conference between Tree and Gifford in order to find means of accommodating their differences. But this interview only served to increase their enmity, and Philip, to show his disgust, ordered a great elm, under which the conferences had been usually holden, to be cut down, as if extremities against the king, to be cut down, as if he had renounced all desire of accommodation, and was determined to carry the war to extremities against the King of England. Now, I will vouch for the size of some of these trees. If you've been to France and you see just in some of the small towns, they will have a massive tree in the center sometimes, and they can be as a large girth around as a massive redwood. So imagine 1,000 years ago plus that it was a huge tree that they cut down. Okay, so here we are. But his own vassals, so he's definitely determined to carry the war to. He's carrying that war to the extremities against the King of England. But his own vassals refused to serve under him in so insidious a cause, and he was obliged to have a second conference with Henry, and to offer terms of peace. These terms were such as entirely opened the eyes of the King of England, and fully convinced him of the perfidy of his son, and of his secret alliance with Philip, of which he had before only entertained some suspicion. The King of France required that Richard should be crowned King of England in the lifetime of his father, and should be invested in all his continental dominions, and should immediately espouse Alice, Philip's sister. Henry had experienced such fatal effects, both from the crowning of his eldest son and from the prince's alliance with the royal family of France, that he rejected these terms, and Richard, in consequence of his secret agreement with Philip, immediately revolted from him, did homage to the King of France for all the dominions which Henry held of that crown, and received the investitures as if he had already been the lawful possessor. This unexpected occurrence being naturally productive of infinite confusion, the conference broke up. Cardinal Albino, who had been sent by the Pope to effect a peace between the two monarchs, excommunicated Richard as the chief obstacle to the treaty, and this prelate dying, the sovereign pontiff, who was anxious to accelerate the expedition to Palestine, invested the Cardinal Anagni with the legatine power and gave him instructions to promote a reconciliation. But the unprincipled obstinacy of Richard rendered all conciliatory endeavours ineffectual. The chief barons of Poitou, Guyenne, Normandy, and Anjou, being attached to the young prince, and finding that he had now received the territories of such, definitely a big difference, well, it's a story that I don't know, but is really the territories of such, as still adhered to Henry, who, disquieted by the daily revolt of his mutinous subjects, and dreaded still worse effects from their turbulent disposition, had again recourse to papal authority, and engaged the Cardinal Anagni to threaten Philip with laying all his dominions under an interdict. But Philip despised the menace and told the legate that it belonging not to the Pope to interpose in the temporal disputes of princes, much less in those which subsisted between him and his rebellious vassal. He even proceeded so far as to reproach him with partiality and with receiving bribes from the King of England. While Richard, still more outrageous, offered to draw his sword against the legate, and was only prevented by the interposition of the company from committing violence upon him. The war was now renewed with additional vigour. Ferté-Bernard was first reduced by the victorious arms of the French. Mons was next taken by assault, and the King of England, who had thrown himself into that place, escaped with some difficulty. Amboise, Chaumont, and Château de Loire opened their gates on the appearance of Philip and Richard. Tours was menaced, and Henry, who had retired to Saumur, and had daily instances of the cowardice or treachery of his governors, expected the most unfavourable issue to all his enterprises. While he was in this state of despondency, the Count of Flanders, the Duke of Burgundy, and the Archbishop of Rheims interposed with their good offices and the intelligence which he received of the taking of Tours, made him fully sensible of the desperate situation of his affairs, and so subdued his spirit that he submitted to all the rigorous terms which were imposed upon him. He agreed that Richard should marry the Princess Alice, and that he should receive the homage and oath of fealty of all his subjects, both in England and his transmarine dominions, that he himself should pay 20,000 marks to Philip towards defraying the expenses of the war, that his own barons should engage to make him observe this treaty by force, and in case of his violating any of the articles it contained, should promise to join Philip and Richard against him, and that such of his own vassals as had supported the cause of Richard should be indemnified for the offence. Is that enough for tonight? I don't know. I'm kind of tired, but yes, I should stop. I'm at page 392, and let it be known that this was the one they're talking about carrying the cross and losing the cross, and the infidels took the cross, and very exciting, because it doesn't go on to say where the cross is right now, but wow, I didn't know they still had it. You know what I'm saying? It's pretty neat that they kept it all those years, huh?